Okay, this is chapter 2, page 23. It was the early morning of a beautiful day. Most of the valley was asleep. The only sounds were the joyful laughter of the running streams and happy little songs of birds. The dew sparkled on the grass, and the flowers glowed like little jewels. Sometimes the shepherd and Much Afraid walked over patches of thousands of blossoms that looked like a carpet in a king's palace. Much Afraid looked at the shepherd. Sometimes I have wondered about the wildflowers, she said. It seems strange that they should grow in places like this where the goats and cattle walk all over them. They have so much beauty and sweetness to give, and hardly anyone sees them. The look the shepherd turned on her was very beautiful. Nothing that my father and I have made is ever wasted, he said quietly, and the wildflowers have a wonderful lesson to teach. Many people live a quiet, ordinary life. Hardly anyone even knows about them, but their hearts are like delightful gardens where the king himself walks and rejoices. Some of my servants have won great respect from other people and are famous, but always their greatest victories are like the wildflowers, which no one knows about. Learn this lesson now, down here in the valley, Much Afraid, and when you get to the steep places of the mountain, it will comfort you. Here's the picture that goes along with it. Some leaves, flowers. Then, he added, come, and the birds are all singing so happily. Let's sing too. So as they walked, they sang together one of the old songs from the Shepherd's Great Book. Just as they finished singing, they came to a place where a rushing stream poured itself across the path, and they were following and went tumbling down the other side. It was running so swiftly and singing so loudly that it seemed to fill the valley around them with its laughing voice. As the shepherd lifted Much Afraid across the slippery, wet stones, she said to him, I do wish I knew what it is that all that running water sings. Sometimes I lie in bed at night and listen to the little stream that runs past the cottage garden. It sounds so happy and sings to sing over me past and over again to pass the time, some lovely secret message. Tell me, shepherd, do you know what the water sings as they hurry on their way? The shepherd smiled, and they stood there, quietly for a moment. Suddenly, as Much Afraid stood beside the shepherd, it seemed as though, bit by bit, the water language became clear. It is, of course, impossible to write it in water language, but this is the best I can do to translate. The water song. Come, oh come, let us away, lower and lower every day. From the heights we leap and flow, to the valleys down below, always answering to the call, to the lowest place of all. I don't understand, said Much Afraid, after she had listened for a while. The water seems to be singing so gladly because it is hurrying down to go into the valley, and yet you are calling me to the high places. What does it mean? The high places, answered the shepherd, are the starting place. It is only up on the high places of love that anyone can receive the power to pour himself out and give to others. Much Afraid still didn't really understand. But now as she listened, she heard the wildflowers and singing the same sort of song. This is the law by which we live. It is so sweet to give and give. After that, it seemed to Much Afraid that all the little birds were also singing the same kind of song. This is the joy of all winged life. Happy it is to be able to love. I never knew before, said Much Afraid suddenly, that the valley is such a beautiful place and so full of song. The shepherd laughed. You will begin to understand many things you never dreamed of before. Come, let's keep going. Soon we will be at the foothills where the mountains begin. There we will find the 2 helpers that I promised you. Much Afraid had almost forgotten the promise that he had made her the day at their meeting place. With the shepherd's strong hands helping her, she had even forgotten that she had crooked feet and that she hadn't felt weak or tired at all. Oh, if only he would take her to the whole way to the mountain places himself. She turned to him hopefully. Won't you please take me all the way up? When I am with you, I'm strong. I'm sure that no one else can get me up to the high places, except for you. He looked at her most kindly, but answered quietly, Much Afraid, I could do that. I could do what you wish. I could carry you all the way instead of having you climb there. But if I did, you would never develop Hinds Feet, become my companion, and go where I go. If you climb with the helpers I have chosen for you, even though it will seem like a very long and hard journey, I promise that you will develop Hinds Feet. Then you will be able to run and jump with me far away from your enemies. Some of them, you know, can visit the lower parts of the mountain. You will probably meet them as you begin to climb. That is why I have most carefully chosen for you two of the very best and strongest helpers. And as I promised you before, even though you won't see me, I will always be there. Whenever you call for help, I promise to come to you at once. You will give me a new name when I get to the top, right? Asked Much Afraid with a quivering voice. When the flower of love blooms in your heart, you will receive a new name, he said softly. Remember my promise? She remembered. Was it really just yesterday when he had planted love in her heart and promised that she would be changed from Much Afraid? She looked into the eyes of the shepherd. I will trust you and do whatever you want, she said. In a very short time, they crossed a bridge at the foot of the mountains. Here, huge rocks were scattered all around, and suddenly Much Afraid saw two women sitting on one of the rocks by the path. They both wore veils over their faces. As the shepherd and Much Afraid came closer, the two stood up and bowed silently to him. Here are the two helpers I promised you, said the shepherd quietly. Much Afraid looked at them fearfully. They were tall and looked very strong, but why did they wear the veils? Why were they hiding their faces? Why didn't they say anything? Who are they? She asked of the shepherd. Will you tell me their names? Why don't they say anything? Can't they speak? Yes, they can speak, said the shepherd very quietly, but they speak a new language, Much Afraid. It is a language of the mountains which you have not learned yet. But as you travel with them, little by little, you will learn to understand their words. They are two of the best teachers I have. This, he said, motioning to the first of the silent women, is Sorrow. The other is her twin sister, Suffering. Poor Much Afraid. She grew very pale and began to tremble. She felt as if she would faint and hung on tightly to the shepherd. I can't go with them, she cried. I can't. Oh, shepherd, why must you make Sorrow and Suffering be my helpers? Can't Joy and Peace go with me? They would make me strong and help me be happy on my journey. I never thought you would do this to me. She burst into tears. He answered her very gently. Will you trust me, Much Afraid? Will you go with them? Or do you want to go back to the valley, to your fearing relatives, to Craven Fear himself? Much Afraid shook at the thought. What a terrible choice to have to make. She knew fear very well, but suffering and sorrow seemed terrifying. How could she go with them? Then she looked at the shepherd and suddenly realized how very much she loved him. Even if he asked the impossible, she would do it. Do I want to go back? She asked. Oh, shepherd, who would I go to? In all the world, I have no one but you. Help me to do what you ask. Help me to trust you. As he heard these words, the shepherd suddenly lifted his head and laughed, a laugh full of delight and victory. It echoed around the rocky walls, and for a moment it seemed that the mountains were laughing with him. Then he spoke. Fear not, Much Afraid, only believe. Go with Sorrow and Suffering. When you come to hard places, put your hand in theirs, and they will lead you exactly where I want you to go. She stepped forward, looking at the two veiled women. She said with a courage that she had never felt before, I'll go with you. So that is Much Afraid and the Good Shepherd. And then over here, the two veiled women. So that's Sorrow and Suffering, the twin sisters that are going to be her helpers. See the veils over their faces? Please lead the way. But she cannot bring herself to take their hands in hers. The shepherd laughed again. Remember my promise to bring you to the high places and to make your feet like hinds' feet. The shepherd laughed again. Remember my promise to bring you to the high places and to make your feet like hinds' feet. He handed them a sack filled with food and water for their journey. Then he jumped on a great rock at the side of the path, and from there to another and yet another. The shepherd went leaping up to the mountains until he was out of sight. Much Afraid started out, limping toward the high places, pretending not to see the outstretched hands of her helpers, Sorrow and Suffering. And we will stop there on page 31.